I'm Chris Carter. This is the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today, we talk about Omar Khan's strategies for both the present and the future. And I think there's some interesting points of view that give us glimpses into what could be the Steelers coming up. It's the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. All right, everyone, we hope you had a good 4th of July. You got to see some fireworks, enjoy some good barbecue. I went to a hip-hop R&B brunch over at City Winery. Shout out to them over there. That was a good time. But let us get into the topic that I talked about, and it's the future with Omar Khan and what he's working on. And that's really the overarching thing that we're going to be talking a lot about, right? Is the roster construction, the investments made both in the draft, free agency, who's getting, favor, what's the future nucleus looking like, and what is that future? Well, I think there's some good questions that you all have submitted on this. So we start with Tim, who has an interesting question that ties into the end of the Kevin Colbert era. But Tim from Charlotte, take it away.
Hey, Chris. Tim in North Carolina, Charlotte. Really enjoy the show, man. Thanks for doing this every single day. I had a question just out of curiosity. I want to know what your thoughts are about Omar Khan and his future a little bit. The reason why I ask that is because I see a lot of reports and other things that talk about, not signing other players, letting good talent walk or whatever the case is. And I know there's a transition period here where he's trying to basically what feels like overhaul the team from Kevin Colbert's era. But do you think that he's similar to Colbert just in a different way? Do you think it's going to be something where we just sort of start siphoning good talent out just to keep, a few dollars and some salary cap space? Curious to see what your thoughts are and what you think the future of the team might look like. Thanks, Chris. Keep up the great work, man. Love the show.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate you calling into the Locked On Steelers call-in line, which, by the way, you can call in at any point in time to 412-223-6644. Leave your name, your question. Keep your question under a minute and let us know where you're from, and we'll try to get you on the show here. But let's dive into this. So, first of all, it is true that there's been a lot of turnover in just basically a year and a half's time or so. Or 2 years, I guess, with Omar, 2.5 years with Omar Khan taking over for Kevin Colbert from the Colbert era. You think about guys being gone like Deontay Johnson, Kenny Pickett, Chuks Okorafor, Terrell Edmonds, Chase Claypool. You can go down the line. Plenty of those guys are gone. Now, some of those guys had to go, right? Like Chase Claypool, you got to say you got the Joey Porter Jr. pick for that. Duh, that's an obvious one. Terrell Edmonds, maybe he outlived what he was supposed to do, though I thought that he could have been kept around for a cheaper deal. Chuks Okorafor definitely being overpaid last year. The Kenny Pickett situation, we've gone down that a million times. And then Deontay Johnson, of course, the really big trade that happened over this offseason. That was the one I was like, I'm not sure they got the best return for that. But here nor there, Omar Khan does have a lot of turnover from the Colbert area in very short order. But I think that's just more of just the acknowledgement that this team has to get better. And the change is part of the process. So here's a few things to think about when it comes to Omar Khan and Kevin Colbert. One, to get to one of the parts of your question, Tim, when you asked about their closeness or how close they are, it helps to remember that Khan was one of the closest people in Colbert's front office to work with him for the majority of his 2 decades being the Steelers general manager. I don't think that Khan sees himself as siphoning talent from Colbert's era to get it out, to get it off the team because it's just so bad. And he just didn't think that Kevin Colbert knew what he was doing because he was part of what Kevin Colbert was doing. But Khan does recognize that where mistakes were made, and that happens. He wants to put his stamp on things, and that's why the Steelers have been aggressive in these years. Partially, they could be aggressive, whereas towards the end of the Colbert era, they had to be less aggressive because they had a franchise quarterback contract. Now they don't. They're able to do a few more things. And make no mistake, part of this is the freshness also of Khan being in the position. Go back and look at some of the moves the Steelers were making when Kevin Colbert first became GM, and you'll see that he was considered one of the more innovative and aggressive guys of his time early in his career. Signings like James Ferrier, trading up for Troy Polamalu, getting Casey Hampton, getting Ben Roethlisberger. He built a heck of a reputation. That's why he's probably going to be in the NFL Hall of Fame someday. But certainly, misses compiled later in his career. Excuse me there. Misses did compile in the draft later in his career, as it does for all GMs and people that get involved in talent evaluation. Nobody is perfect. But Khan's strengths are different than Kevin Colbert's. Remember, Khan was known as being the cap guru when he was working with Kevin Colbert. He understood, but it's more than just the cap. He understands the market for positions and players. Again, it's not just about finance, but about value and how other teams apply that value and use that value to either acquire players and keep players, whether that's the draft, free agency, or in trades. And I think that's really where I think that Omar Khan, and this is something I don't think I even understood until I started to study how Omar Khan's made his moves of late. But you look at how calculated he's been to get the picks that he's gotten for the players that he's traded away. And not everything's been a slam dunk, but he properly waited. He knew where to trade up to go get Broderick Jones. He properly waited out to get Joey Porter Jr. He properly got Darnell Washington while trading down to get back the pick that he traded away to get Broderick Jones, and that got him Nick Herbig. And then this year, a lot of people were saying, "Oh man, there's no way they can get one of these top tackles if they don't trade up in the first round." They stay put. There's no way they can get one of these top centers if they don't trade up in the second round. They get Zach Frazier without trading up. I think that's part of Omar Khan's strength, is understanding the values of things and how they are. And some of it's also betting. Some, if someone had gotten picked, if Zach Frazier got picked before the Steelers took him, yeah, that would have been a problem. And there would have been questions about that. But I think these are examples that might be his strength. Now, his right hand, Omar Khan, that being, seems to be Andy Weidel. And that's where his strength is the scouting, which was Kevin Colbert's strength. Scouting talent, seeing the guys, finding the players that it's like, okay, this is who we value as far as the big board and how good they are and what they need to get better at, and this is how we'll build. And then Omar Khan's able to kind of put that together. But think of it as more of like a presidential position where, the president of an organization might not be the guy that knows how to do all the things, but he knows who to appoint to help him do the things that he's not good at. And I think that's where Omar Khan, at least early on, has shown that he's adept at both doing the things that he is good at and then taking Andy Weidel in and letting him be a huge part of that process. But just like Colbert did in the 2000s and Noel did in the 70s, the Steelers' rise for those eras required getting rid of players, some even players that people liked, and players that were talented and good contributors, like Deontay Johnson, who was a really good player and I think will be missed this year, because that's why everyone says, oh, they need to trade for a wide receiver. But it's part of building for the future. And I think Khan right now is making moves regardless of what it means for having Colbert era guys on the team and Colbert era picks. I don't think he's overhauling just to overhaul. I think that he's looking at his vision of how he thinks this team should be put together to make it a Super Bowl contender again someday, very soon. That vision encompasses what he sees as the priority for the Steelers to get back to being in that upper tier, and also how the Steelers need to be in a position to combat the rest of the NFL in the way their rosters are constructed. And I think part of that also involves what's the future plan for this team at the quarterback position. And that's what I'll discuss next on the show, because I do think Russell Wilson and Justin Fields play a role in this, but maybe they won't. And I want to discuss how all that's part of what I think Omar Khan's strategy is. We'll do that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, that's what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue with the show, picking up where we are. Now, again, I talked about what Khan's been doing as far as the quarterback position. And of course, there was the big, huge dual move at quarterback. They went and signed Russell Wilson for dirt cheap because of his situation with the Broncos. Then, of course, Kenny Pickett didn't like that. He's gone. Now they go and as soon as he was gone, they traded for Justin Fields. So I've gotten a lot of questions about Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. And we'll address this more about their styles of play as we get closer to training camp. That'll be a big watch in training camp to see how both are doing. But let's be clear about this, because this is the question I still keep getting is who's going to be the starter? Who's going to be the starter? It's Wilson. Wilson is the starter for this team. Now, if Wilson's terrible in camp and Fields is great, then we'll see another thing. But it's a legitimate question about how long Wilson will be the starter with that guy with his insanely team-friendly deal. That won't last past this year. And it's also a chance that maybe he doesn't last the whole year as the starter. And there's questions there. But the question is really, which one of these guys is the franchise quarterback? And that question was kind of tapped into by our friend Diesel out in Wilmington, North Carolina. Diesel, take it away.
What's going on, Chris? This is Diesel all the way from Wilmington, North Carolina. And I just got a question about this quarterback thing going on, man. I'm not a hater of Russell Wilson at all. I don't love his personality, and I didn't think it would really mesh well with the Steelers. I know it looks pretty good now, and he seems very supportive, but I'm just kind of wondering if it's going to start to waver like it did everywhere else. Also, with Justin Fields, I get that there's issues with his throwing mechanics, and he looks a little here and there with the throws. Some look amazing, and some will go and have you scratching your head, but I truly was excited when we signed him, and I'm wondering if you really think that maybe in the future they'll give him a shot to start. I know Wilson's in the pole position right now, but, I'm kind of wondering if they really do see a future with Justin Fields or how they even will, because I know they don't give too many starter reps out to those who are backup quarterbacks. I'm kind of wondering when it's going to happen, when he's going to be able to step in and do his thing. And I'm excited for that guy because I just think he's got the immeasurables and he's a good dude. All right, I look forward to hearing from you. You're the man. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Diesel, for your question. Again, 412-223-6644 to get your question on the show. Leave your name, where you're from, and keep your question under a minute. We'll try to get your question on the show. Diesel, I hear you, man, and I think you're tapping into some of the things that a lot of people bring up with Russell Wilson when it comes to his relationship with teams. One of the biggest criticisms came really starting with Russell Wilson before we get into Justin Fields. One of the biggest criticisms of Russell Wilson came from stories that came from the Legion of Boom and Marshawn Lynch about how they just didn't like him and they didn't vibe with him, and there were just things that were definitely there, but they definitely respected his abilities. And I do think there was certainly a power struggle for leadership or who was the most important on the team that might have clouded the situation there in Seattle. Because remember, he was the young hotshot quarterback that Pete Carroll did want to kind of be the guy while the team was winning because the defense was elite and the running back was just monstrous. And I think that Russell Wilson, so there was a little bit of, maybe some culture clashing there. And I think that there might have been some things there. But in Denver, there were several players who defended Russell Wilson, even when he was gone from the team, and openly expressed dismay about him leaving. And in fact, we had Cody Rourke, host of Locked On Broncos, come on this show and talk about, hey, Russell Wilson was not the problem in Denver and was not a problem in Denver. And that the story that he was some problem child that no one got along with wasn't true. And then, yeah, there were some guys that didn't vibe with him at times, but no one vibes with everybody all the time. But the way at least Cody saw it, and the way other people that I've talked to who have really good insights on what's going on within the organization, Russell Wilson wasn't the problem there. So I think that there's that angle of things where, and I feel you may not like him because you feel like he's corny. That's one of the terms a lot of people use. And maybe that's a factor there. But I think it's important to put things into perspective and remember, hey, Russell Wilson is the starter now. And I think the Steelers, they want to rally around that. And it's also known that Justin Fields is behind him. So it's legitimate to ask when or if Fields will replace him this year or next year. But the truth is, I don't think the Steelers are really banking on either direction right now. I think that they are laying out multiple paths for them to choose when they get to those points that they are not overly committed one way or the other. So there's multiple ways that this could go for the New York Steelers to find their next quote unquote franchise QB. Because even right now, if Russell Wilson plays 1 year, even if he's great and he leaves, it's not a franchise quarterback. He was a really good quarterback he had as a free agent for a year and then he left. Justin Fields, maybe he could become that, but we'll get to that. So let's go down the options for who could be the next Steelers franchise quarterback. Let's say it's Russell Wilson. Let's say he lights it up this year. I could see the Steelers sign him to a 3 to 5 year deal, or as long as he wants to play. He said he wants to win 2 more Super Bowls, and I could see that being a thing. And whereas he won't be as nearly as long as Ben Roethlisberger, if you're around for 3 to 5 years and you're playing at a very high level and you're a franchise, you're a Pro Bowl level quarterback, the way Russell Wilson's been for several years, 9 years, I think he's been in the Pro Bowl. That is a franchise quarterback. So that's one of the 3 ways that you could that this could break. But then let's go to the other option. Let's say Russell Wilson is meh, or just not good, and Justin Fields does pass him up and he earns the starting spot and he gets the chance to be the long-term guy. Justin Fields is really young, so like he's still like he's just finishing up his rookie deal. They didn't give his 5th year option, so let's say Justin Fields becomes the guy, then great. You know what? You have a young quarterback that's now part of your team. He's revived his career, and he could be that guy. So there you already have 2 options right in front of you for, hey, if this guy works, great. He's the older vet who's done it before, and he could be the guy for the next 3 to 5 years while we go search for the future down the line. Or maybe you're saying, hey, Justin Fields is the guy. He's the franchise quarterback. Now, you don't got to search for it because you've got it for the next 10 to 15 years or however long Justin Fields will play in the NFL. Cool. And I'm not saying that either of those are even likely. I'm saying that these are the potential paths that the Steelers have laid out for themselves. But the third option I think is actually a lot more interesting than people realize right now, because we're all kind of focused in the present and what could happen this year, and there's a lot of uncertainty about what this offense will even look like. But the third option is that it's neither of them that are the next franchise quarterback, and that both of them are just bridges to the future. Now, again, Omar Khan is smart. He didn't get to this place in his life by not being smart. He got there because he knows how things work, and he understands how to hedge your bets and how to make smart plays. And part of that involves not pinning the Steelers to one direction before he absolutely has to. Because there's certain things you pin in direction. Like, for example, the Steelers are locked into TJ Watt because he's the best defensive player in football. That's committing, but that's not hurting yourself to commit to something because you've committed to an extremely elite player. Same thing with Micah Fitzpatrick's contract and things like that. But there's sometimes when you miss, Chuks Okorafor's contract. That was overly committing. That was a miss, and that was the previous front office with Kevin Colbert. Things like that happen. But I actually think what Omar Khan is primarily doing here is that he's building the roster so that with the real answer might end up being option number 3, which is that the Steelers' next franchise quarterback is either in the draft or somewhere else. And I want to get into that because I think that might be the ultimate plan here for the Steelers to do that, because it might put them in a position that opens up the best window that we have seen for quite some time for them to be real Super Bowl contenders. We'll get into that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. Do you ever get caught up comparing yourself to other people and their lives that you see on the internet or on social media? You ever feel caught up with looking at social media and think someone else's life looks so perfect compared to yours? Chances are their lives probably aren't that perfect. And the best way to live your life is to focus on things that you want and that you can control. But how do you block out all that outside noise and just focus on yourself? Well, that's where therapy can be a great tool to help you get there. And sometimes it just takes a professional to help you refocus on what matters most. That's where, if you're thinking of therapy, you need to give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp knows that life can be busy and stressful, so it's designed to be suitable for your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and then at that point, you can even switch therapists whenever you want at any time for no additional charge. You learn to make time for what makes you happy by going to BetterHelp today. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon. You can get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue my discussion about Omar Khan's plan for the future and what's happening in cornerback. So hear me out. With that third option there, talking about it, not the future franchise quarterback is not Russell Wilson for the next 3 to 5 years, or it's not Justin Fields for the next decade or so. I'm not saying that the Steelers are doomed to see not good results from either of these guys. All I'm saying is that they aren't pinning their hopes to needing either of them to be the ultimate, the next Terry Bradshaw, the next Ben Roethlisberger. Because let's face it, Terry Bradshaw, Ben Roethlisberger, they're your Super Bowls. You got your 2 franchise quarterbacks. And sure, it'd be great if it worked out that way for either of them to be the guy. And I think both possess potentials and skills to be very productive in Arthur Smith's offense that could even set them up to be the closest thing the Steelers have had to either Roethlisberger or Bradshaw at that time. But look at the way the Steelers are building their roster. They want a strong offensive line. They want a loaded defense, a dominant run game. Does all that sound familiar? And I'm not talking about just the old school Steelers of the 70s and the 90s and things like that, or even the 49ers right now, because I often make that comparison because, that's it. But I'm talking about the Steelers as they were constructed when they drafted Ben Roethlisberger. This might be the real plan that ultimately is in place if neither of these quarterbacks are out there, are all that. If Russell Wilson and Justin Fields are either bad, meh, or just not playing like the future franchise quarterback that Khan, Andy Weidel, and Mike Tomlin might actually want. The Steelers weren't getting a quarterback in this year's draft. They had too many other priorities. This wasn't the year to be aggressive there. They had a lot of other stuff that they needed to fix. And next year's quarterback class doesn't look too great, at least from now. They all kind of have guys that everyone's like kind of like how people felt about Kenny Pickett's quarterback draft class year. If you go back far enough, there was an episode actually I did where I was like, maybe they should wait on that class because the CJ Stroud class looks pretty good, and did it. But water under the bridge, that's way far in the past. Again, they weren't getting a draft in this past quarterback in 2024 a quarterback from that class, and 2025 don't look like a great class to draft from. And maybe we'll be proven wrong. It's a lot of speculation moving forward. But what about 2026 NFL draft? That is the year we might see the next really strong quarterback draft class, and it includes one Arch Manning. And yes, that Arch Manning. So if the Steelers just ride it out with Justin Fields and/or Russell Wilson for the next 2 seasons, they can be in a position where they've had these 2 guys come in, be solid vets, and then draft their next best shot at a franchise quarterback in the first round and have the team loaded for that quarterback's arrival because they've been building it the way they've wanted to build it. And the old quarterback, whoever stuck around, whether it was Fields or Wilson, can help the new quarterback adjust to the team. Then if the pick is a hit, you have your top quarterback like on a rookie deal with 5 years with a loaded roster. And that's why I'm saying the real plan might be the third option that I've laid out here. Not necessarily Russell Wilson, not necessarily Justin Fields, but creating the path for one to do it. And again, it's not dismissing the idea or the possibility that Fields or Wilson could be the guy. But I think that Omar Khan, again, he's a smart man. He's not pinning himself in one direction or the other. He's giving himself several different outs so that when it's time to make the call, he's making as informed a decision as possible instead of committing way long before he needs to, and then putting his team and his organization in a tougher spot because of it. So let's go into this long hypothetical here where we're saying 2 years have passed. Russell Wilson and or Justin Fields was really good. They were just decent or whatever. And the Steelers have been, competitive. But now it's 2026, and this quarterback class is just so amazing. But the Steelers offensive line, Zach Frazier, Broderick Jones, Troy Fautanu, they're kicking butt. Mason McCormick's developed. Let's say the passing game, they've gotten another wide receiver with George Pickens. The defense is still, kicking butt and all that stuff. And now you have a chance to add a young quarterback who plays really well, who has a high pedigree, and they come right in and they light it up. But they're not just lighting it up with just any old team. They're lighting it up with a team that was designed to be good even without them. And that might be the best option for a window for the Steelers in this long-term plan. Having a long-term plan, playing chess, not checkers. I think that's what Omar Khan's really trying to do here. And again, that's without they're doing this without having to tank to get that quarterback and without having to fall off and have really terrible years that kind of dismay fans and fall things off. That's the other thing. Steelers fans, a lot of people get upset when they miss the playoffs or don't want a playoff game and all that. Steelers fans have not experienced true misery in the NFL, at least in my lifetime. I mean, Steelers fans, old school Steelers fans definitely have. There's been some rough years. The 80s were not happy. But as far as in my lifetime, I was born in 89. And by the way, 1989, that's the last time this team finished last in any division. It's never finished last in the AFC North, and it's been since I was born that it finished last in the AFC Central. And again, and last even itself isn't always just like, oh, doom and gloom, it's a bad year, but I'm talking about like 2-14 types of years, 3-win years, 4-win years, 5-win years. I think the worst season that I've physically watched from start to finish was 2003 and 1999 when they went 6-10. Those were the two worst seasons that I've seen. And I think what the Steelers have, what Mike Tomlin's been very good at, and what Omar Khan is trying to do is to get them to this point where maybe they can go get that franchise quarterback without having to experience one of those types of years or multiple of those types of years. And I think that if they are able to do that, that could be ideal. Now, you're probably sitting there saying, well, Chris, wait a second. You're talking about drafting Arch Manning and quarterbacks and stuff like that. Doesn't that require them to tank to get that high pick? Well, think about this. If Omar Khan and company and their front office continue to hit in the draft the way they look like they have hit in the draft, let's say in this next draft class, they get another corner to pair with Joey Porter Jr., they get a young defensive lineman to work with Benton and Liao for the long term. Let's say in 2026, your offensive line studs. You got weapons on the offense. You got a system that works. You got a defense that's still kicking butt. At that point, Omar Khan could sit around and say, hey, this might be the most comfortable roster-wise the Steelers have been to not absolutely have to need to draft one of these position players, to actually maybe trade or a slew of position players. That's the thing. Like this year, they needed a tackle in the first or second round. They needed a center in the second round. They needed to go get help there. They needed to probably get a younger player on defense like they did with Peyton Wilson. They needed to address wide receiver. They got Roman Wilson. The year before that, they needed all the needs, tackle, corner. They needed so many different things, but they're piling those up. Now imagine in 2026, they get there and they'll have another draft, their last 3 drafts. Imagine if a lot of those have been hits and they still got the core of vets that they have on the team right now. And now they're bolstered by this younger crew. They might be in a position where they say, you know what, this can be the year where the Steelers trade multiple picks, first, second, thirds, and some extra picks to say, let's go get that future franchise quarterback that's at the top that we've scouted at a high level, and we think that he is the next franchise guy. I think that could end up being the move, is to put the team in such a good position that they can be aggressive in 2026 or the near future after that. And again, that's if Russell Wilson doesn't work out, if Justin Fields doesn't work out, and they have that potential there. But again, these are the multiple roads that I think Omar Khan is putting together. Sure, that's a long hypothetical. There's a lot of things that have to happen to get to either one of those. For that to happen, for the Steelers to even get there. But going back to both Tim and Diesel's questions about Omar Khan, Kevin Colbert, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, I think all this ties back to Omar Khan isn't doing something for ego or for getting rid of guys. He's not doing something because he's like, oh, this is the quarterback that I signed, and I want this quarterback to absolutely be the guy. I think he's just not overcommitting to something until he knows what he has and what the Steelers have. And again, he's seen firsthand, when you overcommit to something that's wrong, it sets you back. It puts you in a bad spot. I mean, let's be real. We've seen that with some of the contracts that they've offered. And look at the Broncos. The Broncos are a prime example of that right now. Alan Saunders was on with us this week, and he talked about the Broncos being maybe one of the easiest teams to beat in this year's NFL. And part of it's because they signed Russell Wilson in free agency this huge deal to the point where he's playing for the Steelers and basically being paid by them to do it. So I think that's where Omar Khan's just trying to avoid that from happening. But while he's avoiding that from happening, he's building a strong roster that allows for these contingencies to even exist, and the Steelers stay competitive in those times. And if he puts them in the best position to rise back to the top, I think it'll be because he gave himself contingencies while making smart picks in the draft, building naturally through the organization the old school way, not just signing a whole bunch of guys randomly in free agency and hoping that they all mesh, but building the culture under Mike Tomlin and getting them to a point where either one of these two quarterbacks they've signed in free agency work out for them, or signed and traded for, because Justin Fields was traded for, but one of these two veteran quarterbacks that they acquired this offseason work out, or they put themselves in the position to have a roster that a rookie quarterback or a young quarterback can get hot on, play very well in, and then they'll get to experience what the Chiefs experienced with Patrick Mahomes, what the Bengals did with Joe Burrow, what the Bills did with Josh Allen, the Ravens with Lamar Jackson, and all the young quarterbacks that have risen up over the past 5-6 years. They'll get that window. I think that is where Omar Khan is putting himself in the position potentially get to, if again all these the two quarterbacks on the roster don't work out right now, and again, it's contingent on a lot of different things, but I think that's where he's at, is he's not pigeonholing the Steelers into one thing. He's giving them multiple roads, and he's saying, hey, let's cross that road when we get there. Thanks again for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks again to both our calls in today, Tim and Diesel, for your questions. As always, it's 412-223-6644 to get your question in on the show. Thanks again for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Have a great weekend, y'all. We're back Monday with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.